Great.
Hi.
And this is back. Meeting minutes for October 16th. Mr. Hall, seconded by Mr. Reagan. Any questions? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? First up, we have planning, Mr. Folkenauer. Welcome. Did you find your way in the snow? I have your resolution.
Thank you. And with me tonight is Matilda Larson, senior planner in the office, and the primary planner that works with the transit system. There are a lot of transit resolutions. Probably a good idea. Other questions, resolutions. First resolution is for electronic passenger counting system. This was something that was competitively bid. There was only one bidder. It was Casio. It's interesting technology. I'll try to explain it until we probably have more expertise. But essentially, it allows the a little more flexibility and a little more accuracy in terms of how many passengers are riding the buses. At present, the drivers are responsible for taking that count. This will allow for free up some of the time that the drivers have, which will allow for more continuity with the stops and the routes, and it will give us a more accurate count as well of the passengers.
Are there any questions? Mr. Lakeland.
What precipitated this? Was there some discrepancy in the count that the driver was making, or?
The equipment that was just installed last week will allow people to upload an app to their phone so that they can do some route planning to find out when their bus is arriving, stop, and what routes are available to take them on the stage. This software component is an add-on to that hardware system that will allow us to report how many people board the bus at every stop. So we would be able to look at some data analysis to find out which stops are most heavily used, what stops are not heavily used, should be so that we can make them more efficient. Some of the older routes that exist today began 20 years ago. One of those routes is 2 hours. And it covers nearly all of the western and northern portions of the county. Is there a better way that we can use that?
Okay, if I may. So this is grant funded. Okay, and what's the amount of the grant? And what period of time does it include?
Every year, New York State will allocate a certain amount of money to invest in capital as long as the equipment has a shelf life for about 2 years. And the most recent amount that was allocated to St. Lawrence County was.
Okay,
So there are pools of money that allow us to spend on things like this.
so that grant then is not specifically for this particular item. It's a part of a, okay. So what's the cost of this? What's the dollar amount that's gonna cost the state? Okay, and are you telling me that in addition to counting the number of people, it does other things too, or it's a part of a,
The equipment that was installed will allow for two-way communication between the dispatch office and the driver. Because there's a complementary program that exists called First Mile, Last Mile. So if a person is not within walking distance of a bus stop, they can call ahead and say, would you please pick me up at this location? And the volunteer driver will come, pick that person up, drop them off to a bus stop that will take them to their final destination. And that reminder service will help drivers not leave stranded riders.
okay, thank you.
Mr. Hull is next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You mentioned that the system is tracking passengers on and off buses, and that there's an app involved they can use for route planning. Do they have to be using the app or using the phone for them to be counted as passengers on and off, or is it passive? It's as
It's
they
passive.
enter.
So as the passenger is boarding the bus, rather than using pen and paper and a clipboard, it'll now be mounted onto a mobile data terminal. Look at that.
Of course,
Madam Chair, so the bus driver inputs under the screen, because there's a large population of Amish that utilize these, so I'm thinking of the cell phone, you know, we might have a couple
They will not
stragglers
correct,
around there.
but
Yeah.
the heaviest user.
Sure.
anyone else?
How many times are you gonna utilize this? Like, once you get your baseline, are you gonna like every couple of years do it, or do you look at so many routes are getting heavier, just based off, like, you know?
We are hoping to record at least 6 months of data before we sit down and say, okay, this is how many buses we have in operation. Here are all the heavy stops. Where does it make sense to make more efficient routes? So once we've had that 6 months of data, we're hoping to create new routes that will be instituted probably a year.
Are you gonna constantly update it to, if you have to keep, like, what would be the timeline to reevaluate every quarterly? Would it be like?
The data that we will record, you're asking for how long we'll be using it. My goal is to use it in perpetuity. Because we have to submit quarterly reports to the DOT on how many trips were boarded and how many miles.
Nothing else? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Next up, I have a resolution authorizing the chair to sign a contract with Brasco International Inc. for a solar powered bus shelter by Mr. Forsythe, second by Mr. Snell.
Thank you. This is, again, it was competitively bid. One bidder, Raskin International, was the sole bidder. You may be familiar with the bus shelter. Very similar to that structure. It will be going out at the HSC building, and it will have some that solar lights. Offers a great shelter for people on the bus. So it's a nice amenity to have. The cost of this is $14,700.
Anyone have any questions? Mr. Hall?
Madam Chair, I'm just curious, how do the solar roofs do the snow load in the winter? Does that snow pile up and be removed manually? How does that work?
It's been sloughing off on its own. And it's hard to know. So you just recently installed it. So I think we're gonna get a lot of overcast days and a lot of dark days. So it may not be readily available in the full 10 to 12 hours. But the good news is that where the shelter was installed, it doesn't sit in the shadow of the DSS building. So that has been great.
And then does it have a backup wired power source? It's
It
not
does
on the
not.
grid.
We did not connect it.
Any other?
the amount of 1 million. And that's broken down through a number of different programs, 5311 program, at SES or supportive employment services program and mobility management. We do have monies that have been allocated for 2023 that total $603,222. But this budget modification is required to bring us up to the allocation for the 2023 total award, $750,625. So the 147 that you see as the increase is the difference between the 602 number and the 750.
Any questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Next up, I have a resolution modifying the 2023 budget for planning office for additional funding for public transportation services in our county.
Thank you.
Oh, wait, moved by Forsythe Dragon, sorry.
This resolution, if it's your pleasure, does need some modification. If it's okay, Sarah, if you go through. There was just some language copying that happened in this resolution. So it is intent was to address two funding sources that the county received one-time allocations for. One was Corona Response and Relief Supplemental Corporation Act funding that you see in the first whereas, that was $889,500. That was already received in 2021 and 2022. The second whereas should not repeat the CRISA or the coronavirus response money. Instead, it should be American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 funding, and then the dollar amount should not be the 889. It should be $900,222,395. That's the first change. The second change on the last line of the second whereas, that 396,880 should read 363,642, and the 2023 the next number of 525, 515 should read 558,753. And then the breakdown in the increased appropriations, the first number instead of 420, 337 should be 430, 337. And the second number instead of 105,000 should be 128, 416, which will total the number previously referenced of 558, 753. And then the increased revenue should be a total of 558, 753. And we apologize for these numbers. It's just some confusion and just trying to get them as accurate as possible. So if
You want to offer that as a
I think that is a friendly amendment, just incorporated into the existing resolution. If Chair, if the motion sponsor will accept that,
Fine, yep.
Okay.
and I as a second will accept.
All right, does anyone have any questions about this? All right, so then we have to vote on the,
Sure. So the numbers, the reason for the change is that there was unexpended funds in 2022 for the ARPA funding. We were allocated $396,880. We only spent $363,642. So that balance can roll over to 2023. So the 525 number, which was in the original resolution, should be increased by about $36,000. The balance from 22 that was not expended. That's the rationale for the change.
does anyone have any questions about the resolution? Okay, seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. We have a resolution modifying the 2023 budget for the forestry for an increase in funds awarded to the snowmobile trail grant. Moved by Mr. Forsythe, seconded by Mr. Jeanette and Mr. Sheridan.
Thank you very much. So we did get notice from the state that we have received our allocation for 2023-2024. This was a modest increase, about a $1,500 increase from 2023. So that was nice to see. And there will be a modification, budget modification necessary because we do need to pay the trail maintenance entities their 70% allocation for this year for 2023 before the season starts. And that requires the modification to add $65,287 to the budget to bring that balance up to the 70% allocation, which is $157,198.
Anyone have any questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Thanks for your time. I appreciate it. Thank you. It's over. It's very good. Okay. Next up, we have the district attorney, Gary Castle. I have a resolution authorizing the chair to sign the 2023-2024 criminal justice discovery reform grant with the New York State Department of Human Services. Attorney's office moved by Ms. Forsythe, Ms. Hall, Mr. Jeanette, Mr. Knightfoot, and Mr. Reagan.
This is, I think, the third time we've gotten this grant. It just started after the discovery reforms in January of 2020. This is a much larger grant award than we got the very first year, which was only about $150,000. The second time we got it, it was really for a 2-year period because of COVID. But this last year, the state government and the governor have put a lot more resource into this particular grant. They upped the funding to, I believe it was $40 million for the entire state. And that's a funding level that, according to those that I've talked to, is a commitment that they've made going forward over at least hopefully the next 5 years and then beyond to help with the changes that have been made. So our portion of that was approximately $417,000. That will pay for 2 of my assistant district attorneys in full, their salaries plus fringe. It'll also pay for our storage fees that are associated with my PCMS system, which handles all of my electronic discovery. In addition to that, I've set aside money for grand jury transcripts, which will enable us to pay the expedited rate of our stenographer, which will allow us to get those out faster to defendants. And in addition to that, we've also set aside $90,000 to give to the city of Ogdensburg for a police officer position. I've talked with the chief of police about that and made it clear that my conditions for including that in our plan are that the city adds a police officer position to their budget. The funds can't be used to simply reimburse the city for what they already have. Speaking with the chief, they're basically down to 16 officers that they can put on the road from 28. That is not sustainable for the city of Ogdensburg. And while this one position may seem like a drop in the bucket, it certainly is much needed, and any help that the city can get at this point with what they have going on, I think is well worth it. There is no commitment for the grant that we get next year in terms of whether we will provide that funding source again. As I said to the chief, I hope with whatever changes come in January that they will increase the number of police officers in their own department. However, as I said to him, if we have the ability through the grant to continue to provide some resources, I will try to do that. And especially since Ogdensburg, outside of the state police, over a 5-year average, with more arraignments than any other department in the county. So it's certainly well-deserved, the money going there, and it is what the grant is supposed to be for. So it'll certainly help them, it'll help us, and I think it'll take the burden off of the state police as well as the sheriff's department.
Any question, Mr. Forsythe is first?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Gary, I'd like to thank you. It's much needed. It's no secret the city is short-staffed on police and law enforcement. I believe there's hopefully 2 more coming on board here, maybe announced pretty quick. So this will go a long way to help. They're in dire straits. So thank you for your efforts in considering that.
Mr. Reagan?
Gary, I just want to echo what Dave just said, and I think, you know, we've all seen the dramatic rise in complaints that are occurring in the city of Ogdensburg. And you know, since the funding was cut to the city, you know, this is grant money, does not affect the county's actual revenues. You're to be commended as district attorney for this leadership that you're providing. And as someone who sees firsthand where the needs are across the county, you know, I know you've been in the city on numerous occasions and are, you know, better aware than many people about the problems that we're seeing, because, you know, countywide, we're seeing organized crime bringing these drugs into the county, and our law enforcement community needs all the help it can get, and it needs that assistance targeted where the problems are the worst. So thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for your assistance. And I, for one, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Anyone else? I would also like to say thank you. You know, average person doesn't understand that a lot of this crime is being committed by people who are using mood and personality altering substances. The idea of harming somebody when you're totally sober is a very different thing than what your body does when, you know, you're high and on methamphetamines and all sorts of other stuff, which is being brought in by organized crime into our community. It would help if on the other end, we might fix the Bail Reform Act, but that would make your job a little easier. But thank you for your efforts, sir. I appreciate it. Anyone else? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you. The next up, we have Matthew Benner, our emergency service. Greetings. I have a resolution authorizing the creation of a solar eclipse planning and emergency management, ad hoc committee, moved by Mr. Forsythe, seconded by Mr. Reagan and Mr. Junior. Go ahead, sir.
This is the resolution of finance, for the public's interest to create a solar eclipse planning and emergency management committee to consider such issues, to help organize local planning efforts and to advise recommendations to you all for adoption of planning.
Anyone have any questions for Mr. Dennis? Okay, so seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Denner. Next up, we have vacancy.
So the committee convened on November 7th to consider 14 vacancies from 6 departments. And as frequently shared with you, the rate fell from our first two reporting periods to immediate fill rate of 94%, with two other categories introduced, one held for 30 days and one held or withdrawn. So that's about a 2.5%, 3% decrease. So that's what those two percentages decreased to. So on this agenda tonight, we have, first is our county clerk, our deputy county clerk, Melissa Friel is here to speak to the request to fill an index clerk.
We got a vacancy that was, one of the girls in the office went to the state, so we can fill our index clerk position.
Any questions? Seeing none. Thank you.
And next up, the district attorney's back up here.
Yeah, so last month I was here. We had our chief assistant district attorney has left government employment, started other avenues. So we have promoted somebody internally to that position. That was accomplished at the beginning of this month. So these two positions, one is to fill his position with someone internally. And the second position then would be to hire someone new to fill that then vacant position. So really just backfilling those two positions that are already there.
Mr. Forsythe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. How's the pool?
Uh,
Slim to none or?
I don't know yet.
Okay.
From what I hear from my friend in the public defender's office, it's not great. But I think that we will have a chance, given what I know. Other counties are offering entry-level ADAs, and what I believe we'll be able to offer them at an entry level is on par with that. And, you know, I'm talking about places with big cities, and we hopefully are gonna be on par with that come January. And given the cost of living difference between there and here, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to get a better pool. I think too, this is hitting at a good time because typically it's right about mid-November when the bar exam results come out. So we'll have a good idea of the recent graduates from law school who are hopefully looking for employment. So I'm optimistic we were able to fill the last one pretty quickly with somebody who moved up here right away, bought a house in Canton, and who's, I think, here for the long term. We've been lucky these last 6 years. I'm hoping that holds out.
Thank you.
Mr. Smithers, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, are these both grade 4 or is one of them grade 5 like we talked about in the committee?
So one, to fill the spot with the individual who left to become my chief ADA, that is a grade 5 position. That'll be filled internally with somebody who already works here at the county. Their position after they move up is a grade 4 at this time.
Did that answer your question, Harry?
I think so.
Anybody else? Mr. Denisian?
Gary, the salaries of our assistant DAs, are they competitive across the counties? Yes or no?
As we sit here in this moment, no, they are not. Just looking at the county directly to our east, and they haven't been able to fill a couple of positions. I know that they start off higher than our grade 4. They're not really competitive there. So as we sit here right now, no, I don't believe they're really competitive. However, I am hopeful with the budget that I know and I believe will be put in front of all of you. I think goes a long way to rectify that across the board, not only in my department, but in the county attorney's office as well. and other departments. And I think it's a major step forward in us being able to recruit good people and to be able to retain people here. And, you know, part of that too, aside from the discovery grant I told you about, with that 417,000, the state also upped our aid to prosecution grant, which we used to get, I believe it was 53,333 every year. This year we got 309,000 because they put more money into funding that as well across the state, so that we're able to retain people by being able to raise income through our salary structure. So, you know, that money, which is also going to be coming in, I think will go a long way too, with what I hope are the changes coming in the new budget to offset pretty much all of those expenses, at least for my department as well. Thank you.
Anybody else? Yes, and last up we have public defender. We started to include on the summary that's in your agenda, an update for you. We've seen an uptick in transfers between departments, promotions throughout departments. We aren't seeing as many departures from county service. So we started capturing that on the top right-hand side of your summary. I think last month we had a dip in that number, but this month it's up to 8. So we're seeing either promotions or internal transfers between departments. So certainly a positive to retain folks who have been trained, understand how the county works, to be able to move across and assist us in a new capacity. That being said, though, James is here to request one position. James?
Yeah, this is our clerk position. This person left to take a senior clerk position at the Department of Social Services, which is quite a big jump for her. This is our main person that handles insurance phones, kind of like our discovery, as Dave Pascal mentioned. Responsible. Look at it, mainly primary person that answers phones, initiator of all things throughout our office.
Questions? Thank you, James.
Next up, we have the 2024 tentative budget review.
Few slides for you. To provide you with a little bit more in-depth discussion around what's included in the tentative budget, and then also highlight a few areas in the operations committee departments. But certainly also provide you with an opportunity, if you have questions, to be able to answer those for you, or to take those questions back and get you the information that you're looking for. So we'll start tonight with the overview of the tentative budget. Slide. So you have in your budget summary, which is included in your budget books, the overview, which is a breakdown of categories associated with the appropriations. That gives you a little bit of sticker shock when you're looking at the totals, and I understand that. Our personnel costs are up $2.7 million or 5% going into 2024. Our equipment's actually slightly reduced, and often that's based in grant funds. We've shifted a lot of the acquisition of equipment through grants. So most of the time when you see those numbers drop, that's associated with either a grant ending or a new grant not yet beginning. But the real sticker shock, for me anyhow, and I'm sure for you, comes in the contractuals, where you see an increase of 10% to the overall budget. And that totals $16.1 million. And we'll talk a little bit more in a few slides, but I just want to highlight that we are seeing an additional $7.4 million in highway in those appropriations. We're seeing an additional 3.1 in social services, or 3.4 in social services increase. We have modest increase in smaller areas like indigent defense, public health, and our treasurer's office is up 2.5 million. So we'll go through some of those in a little bit more detail, but I wanted to kind of broaden your minds to the appropriation side. There's revenue against. You're all familiar with how highway works, in that in most projects we pay 5, 10, maybe 15%. So there's revenue matching those increases, but that appropriation number jumping is certainly stands out on this page to me. And then you also see in our employee benefits a $3.4 million increase, or 5%. So what you do see though is an 8.1% increase in our appropriations, but we have a 9.25% increase in revenue. We've recognized additional sales tax as we're continuing to see increased performance. And for a number of years, we chased this number and we weren't sure it was going to hold out, and we weren't sure it was going to hold out. And at some point, it becomes a challenge for us because the funds we're not recognizing coming in revenue end up going on the levy. And so recognizing that we're 3 years into an increase in sales tax, we've continued to start to recognize some of that. But we also know the danger of over-reliance on sales tax can be challenging for any budget. So I just want to put that out there, but mention to you also, we're going up 20.5 in revenue for 2024 as recommended. What you don't see in the 2024 tentative is a recommendation for appropriating fund balance. And you have, for the last 4 years, I believe, seen a modest appropriation associated with a few different areas. This last year, it was the equipment for solid waste. It was also associated with the payment for the stop loss insurance. And there was one other category. So there were 3 breakdowns of 3 different funds supporting the appropriated fund balance. But you don't see that in this year's budget because in 2024, our plans to appropriate fund balance do exist, but they're going to be surrounded in the public safety project. The balance between, or some formula between what the board has appropriated in ARPA funds associated with the 5 million set aside for capital investment, and the difference between what the cost of the project will be requested to be paid out of fund balance. So we don't know that number yet because our bids aren't back in. You'll see that either next month or in January. So there will be an appropriation from fund balance for 2024. Any questions before I move on? Okay. Next up is an illustrative slide for you that shows you 2 things. It shows you a $10 million gap of the levy. And you can see in the years, and this goes back to 2015 when we started with a negative $2 million in fund balance. And it shows you in the years between 15 and 19, that levy stayed pretty flat. And it starts to show you in 2020 an increase. It's a pretty stark increase. It's $2 million into 21 and into 22, pretty flat. And then last year and this year, we've started to increase. This year at 51, and for 2024, I'm requesting 54 million. Conversely, you can also see the true value tax rate since the same year, 2015, has gone from 852, matching that flat, consistent decrease that you saw from 15 to 19, coming down to a recommendation for 2024 of $7.15. So you're seeing the increase of the levy and a decrease in the rate. And so you wonder, why would that be? We're fortunate, next slide. We're fortunate this year to benefit from a few things. We're seeing increased performance in sales tax, but we're also seeing an increase in our assessed valuation of 11%. And so that allows for the rate to be divided, even though it's come up just modestly, to be divided into that total assessed valuation and the rate to actually decrease. And that's what we've been able to do. We've had to modify that each year, depending on the growth. And each year there's about 2 to 3 towns or villages that do revaluations. And that looks at properties, looks at the market, and matches them up. And the county has nothing to do with that process. That's at the local level. We take that total, and sometimes there are reductions and sometimes there are increases. We take that total and we divide it into the levy we're requesting, and that gives us our rate. And so this year, I've got the last 5 years in front of you. You can see the rate change is 13.6% in 4 years. That's the request for 2024. And that growth from 2020 at 49 million, coming up to the requested 54. That's 5 million in 4 years for an almost $300 million organization. And it also shows you in the last column, the levy change. Negative, basically flat in 22, and modest, always under 5%. But each year we've been able to stay under the tax cap. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But we also contend with the effects of inflation. We also contend with the levy average increase annually is 1.3 million for the last 4 years. And finally on this slide, The levy that I'm requesting equates to 18% of the overall budget. And the override that you've been requested to approve asks for 500,000 over the 1.7 million designated in our available tax cap for 24. Sign. So this one may be a little bit more difficult to see, but I really just want you to follow the trend. And I'll have these slides printed for you for next week so that you can have them, and we'll put them out on the board share as well. 2 points I want to make with this slide. The orange line represents the levy as a portion of the total appropriations. So I'm asking for 54. Overall budget requested is 296. And you can see that hovers between 20% and 18% now since 2015. Pretty predictable, pretty consistent, and pretty modest. And then you look at the bottom, and you're looking at the overall change in budgeted appropriations from year to year. Again, all under 5%. Remarkable stability in the annual levy relative to our total appropriations, which, as we just talked about, sticker shock, has grown considerably. But the interest, both of department heads who take it seriously and have chased grants and have brought in new revenue sources and have brought you recommendations for new revenue sources and gone out and captured those, and also the good fortune of valuation and sales tax performance. We've also seen a return of our own sales tax to our own county. Next slide. Now I want to talk about the tax cap just for a moment. The challenge that we face by doing what we think we're supposed to do, or not going to that cap every year, I would show the contrast of school districts. But coming in $1 million, $2 million, $1, all of those you've seen over the years under the tax cap. Had we gone every single year to the tax cap we were provided, our total would be 5.1 million higher than it is today. But instead, in some years, we asked $1 under the cap, up to 2 million. Right sizing the levy for what the services and the needs were for the county. So it would seem, and many counties have shared, it's punitive. Now that we have done our due diligence, we have returned to fiscal health, that we probably should have taken that approach, but in those years, we didn't see an 11% valuation increase. And in those years, every second to last slide showed you what it would look like if you went to the tax cap every year. In some cases, it would have raised taxes, which this board has been adamantly against. In some years, it would have lowered taxes less. And the board has chosen not to exercise those options because we bring you a budget you can adopt. With that being said, this arbitrary tax cap that we work with is developed through a formula that the state gives us. And for 2024, our growth factor was the 7th lowest in the state, which should come as no surprise considering our relative poverty in the county, and was 52% below the New York State average. So we're starting behind as far as I'm concerned. So I've illustrated on this slide the difference of the tax caps in those years that we didn't take. And what we're asking for in the difference this year is under 600,000. Next slide. So one of the benefits of doing that is healthy reserves. And out of the fund balance that the board has recreated after being negative in 2015, is a healthy fund balance that now boasts 19.7 million in reserves. You've approved them, you've supported them, you've allowed me to recommend funding them year after year. And they're set aside for specific purposes. That allows us in years, let's say, where either sales tax gives you pause, assessed valuation definitely will not stay 11%. In those years where those things change, we have reserves to offset the difference. So we don't have to go to the taxpayers to pay for it. That's been the goal of this board. The reserves are there, and so is the savings in the true value tax rate. So this just represents our total reserves are 7% of our total appropriations revenue. That's not our total fund balance. We know we have set aside funds for highway, workers' comp, solid waste. Overall, in the available fund balance, We have 19.7, which is 32% of your levy, but 7% of your overall budget. So then we talk about the changes from New York State and from the federal government. Next slide. And these are the realities of the things that we were looking at. And I talked to you about these in detail when I asked for the override of the tax cap. The challenge we faced was with sales tax. They were intercepting AIM dollars. They had created this hospital distress fund, which left our number uncertain. Now they said, you can have your sales tax back, and we're grateful. And now they've decided to move over and intercept the Medicaid dollars from the federal government, intended for counties. And so I've captured the total here. The ultimate implementation of the EFMAP intercept is 3.1 million, but they've been gracious to us and only implemented on a 2-year scale. This year it's 750 that we didn't budget because they did this after we adopted. This coming year for 24, it'll be 1.5 million, and full implementation in 2025 will be 3.1 million. We've also seen a long overdue increase, a doubling of the assigned council rates, which we've been asking for probably all 20 years that I've been here. And now the cost is being passed on to counties. The state has stepped up and said they'll pay for half of the increase just to complicate the formula. But for us, that's another increase of 430,000. The adoption subsidy, due to a finding in court case, has an additional $500,000 associated with the payments. Our MAT program in the jail, which is a mandate, puts $125,000 on the levy of a roughly $600,000 program. We're using opioid settlement funds to offset that cost to minimize the impact on taxpayers. Our New York State retirement cost, which is a part of that overall benefit number we talked about at the beginning, is 1.2 million for 2024. And another court finding was a revenue sales loss associated with the Pennington case we spent a lot of time talking about. That's another 600,000. So before we buy a pencil, before we heat the buildings, we're 4.8 million in absorbing costs passed on to counties. And our allowable tax cap is 1.7. Doesn't make sense, does it? So that being said, our tentative budget is asking, as I mentioned, for 579,000 over the tax cap. Next slide. I've mentioned all these to you. The other is local programs versus mandated programs. As I mentioned when I talked about the override at finance, the Office for the Aging program is now being appropriately funded in the waning days of pandemic funds. So that's an additional $700,000 in cost. Can you go back a slide? That indigent defense cost and public health is also seeing the end of some of their grants. There are no service level changes or service reductions in the 2024 budget. Moving on now to personnel. This is the chart that you see at the summary page, but also at the beginning of every department page. So you can both see cumulatively the increases as well as the totals in departments at the department level. So overall, our new total is 882.53 full-time equivalents. That is a combination of board action, and there actually is a negative FTE count associated with the budget planning and recommendations. But included here on the right side are the completion of transition for elections inspectors moving over to being employees, and wage changes associated with 3 of the categories for Board of Elections. We're adding fiscal and support titles in the county clerk's office, sharing one between human resources and purchasing, solid waste and public health, and information technology. We've also made adjustments for some positions that have been vacant for longer than 6 months, understanding that when departments come to the vacancy committee and then come to the board, if they can demonstrate a need, there's not been a denial of positions. But we don't believe in putting them on the levy if they aren't filled. We added 1 position to IT, as many of you have been involved with and spent time on. We've improved our security, both for swipe access and for cameras. So we've added a position in IT for that purpose, to control security for the county in all of our facilities and to control access and understand where we are and where we need to go. It's the natural next step for us. We've stepped up our efforts on cybersecurity. We need to make sure we have many different age buildings who have different types of access to make sure that we control and understand what's in place. And I also recommend maintaining the additional 4 CO positions above minimum staffing and to maintain the clinical roles that the board has taken action to fill. So moving on now to Operations Committee. There are 12 departments that report to Operations Committee, and that's a total countywide of these departments with 302 staff. And in the appropriation side again, that's 39.5 million of the overall appropriations report to Operations Committee. So listed here are the departments that we talked about. If you have any questions, I'm certainly happy to answer those. Just got a couple more slides to go through. Here's the breakdown of the total staff per department, their total appropriations and net county cost, and how that fits against the levy. So as you can see, and many of you know, even in the quarterly reporting, our county clerk's office pays for their entire operation and then brings in revenue. So you see that as a negative. And we make reductions in this area, is one we talked about. When we're seeing a dip in revenue, we're also recognizing that if it holds out for longer than a year. So we've made reductions in the last 2 years in the county clerk's revenue associated with the downstate registrations. And specific to the operations department, next slide. We have abolished 2 election clerk part-time positions and created 2 data management technicians. As I mentioned previously, we increased some wages for some of the temporary and per diem staff. We abolished a DMV clerk, as well as a portion of a part-time. We created a fiscal officer. To the point I was just making about the county clerk's office and operations, they perform $4 million worth of operations and they don't have a fiscal title. So we felt strongly this was the year to implement that, to allow them to get organized with those funding streams, as well as be able to coordinate. District Attorney's Office abolished the senior clerk and created 1 assistant district attorney. That's one that District Attorney Pascal was referencing tonight and paying for with the resolution for the grant funds coming in. So that'll be fully funded. The network technician I just talked about for information technology. And we're creating a shared office manager position between our IT operation and the staff in Department of Social Services. They're the only department in the county that has their own IT staff because they're on the state system. And they're a quarter of our county staff. So we're including an office manager. Any of the departments that had less than a 1 FTE change, I didn't note here, but certainly I'm happy to go through it with you and go over it in your budgets. Next slide. So that concludes our operations discussion. Next week, we'll go over the services in much the same fashion, not as much spent on the overall county budget. I'll dig in a little deeper in community services, public health and social services, some of the larger budgets in our county. And then at finance, we'll finish the remaining departments listed there. And before I take questions, I have one more slide. Just want to go over with you the rest of the process. So we have these reviews tonight. You certainly are welcome to ask any questions when I finish. We'll have the departments for services next week, the departments for finance on the 27th. And then we'll move to the finance committee passing the budget to the full board. Now in our county, it's a little unusual because we are a committee of the whole. So all members are present. In other counties, they may not be. So the finance committee passes the budget to the full board for review for 6 days. We will then publish notice for a public hearing, anticipated, if all goes well, for December 4th. And that also will have the resolution on that board meeting agenda for consideration for adoption. That would be December 4th. The budget needs to be adopted by December 20th, or the most recent version that I've prepared is what's adopted. Once adopted, we're required to publish this 2 times within 20 days. And since we use all the official newspapers, we'll do that in all of our papers. We typically do an abbreviated version, but we'll make sure that it's in a few papers and online. And on January 1st, 2024, the budget you adopt will become available for utilization. Questions? Mr. Forsythe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I got a few things I just wrote down on the presentation and what I've looked at the budget. Mr. Lightfoot brought up last time at finance, I believe it was, that sales tax is starting to trend statewide, starting to trend down. We looked at our third quarter, and our third quarter this year was off. I'm a little leery of 80 million, but I guess we had to just watch it and follow it. Once again, I talked to my Lisbon Town Board at my meeting last week. There was no issue concerning overriding the tax cap, anyone on the board. For me, it was always a perception, same with most of us here. And at the time, we never really had money to worry about these issues. But I agree now, this year is the year to do it, especially with the higher assessed value. Health insurance flat concerns me. Industry-wide, runaway train, and I don't know how they're gonna get a hold of it. But I hope that the buyout that we initiated a few years ago, I noticed that we're appropriating more towards that. And I hope that that helps. But when I see more employees, that's concerning, okay? I like the idea if we reduce no services. We maintain this budget, we reduce no services. And I like the idea that we're looking at departments, the way we do business and restructuring if needed and looking at all the options. And especially with administrators now coming in with someone to supersede or carry on after. So I think those are important. And I think it's important that people know that we're not reducing services, but we're getting handed an awful lot of additional from the state. And to come up with a budget that I do have concerns with, but to be able to arrive at a budget, I think is kudos to you people involved in this. And I just can't thank you enough. I think the taxpayers in St. Lawrence County can't thank you. Plus, in the last couple of years, we were able to build 2 outposts, paid cash for them.
Yeah.
One, we didn't, where we could. We're gonna maintain and take care of the old jail.
Yeah.
That's long overdue. And we're gonna fix the public service board. So I think this speaks volumes. So I'll support this all the way. I can vote on it tonight. Thank you.
Anyone else? No.
Mr. Smithers?
Ruth, on the sales tax, I share that concern about the optimism that you're putting out there for an increase in sales tax. And this always has been we don't know what sales tax is going to be until we get it. My question, I guess, would be, is this consistent with economic forecasts? Because it seems like, as Joe said and Dave said, that I'd be a little more cautious on the expectations of sales tax for 2024. So I'm just questioning why you're being so optimistic.
Well, a couple of factors. I think for a number of years, we hovered around 60 million when sales tax was climbing to 67, 69, 70 and higher. And looking at how we finished 2023 at 79 million, I recognize that the third quarter gave pause. However, we had a third quarter in 2022 that was, I think, 14% higher. It was out of line with what we were seeing even on a good day. And so coming back down below that, I'm not too worried about that. I do think those are areas, both sales tax and looking at our overall cost of operations with inflation. I think both of those, one works for us when the other's working against us. And so I think the challenge we face is monitoring those close. We certainly could add an additional portion of our quarterly reporting. So if the board needs to take other action, we can do that early and make adjustments for that revenue. But that's a number we usually spend a terrific amount of time with the budget team battling and debating, and we did it this year. Because when we don't recognize revenue we're receiving, it goes on to the levy. And after a number of years of watching that, we have to, I think, true up the numbers, but recognize there is also some challenges in the economy.
Mr. Webster.
Question for you. A lot of this sales tax people believe is driven by so much more sales. Especially in the beginning of COVID, it had to do with the cost of sales going up. And cost of goods have gone up so high now they can't go much higher. So the sales tax is kind of playing down. So, I mean, at this point, I don't know how it could go up any more or get any higher than what it is now. I don't see sales going up. I don't see how they can raise the cost of sales anymore. Does that seem,
Is there a question?
I mean, do you see that in it or?
So finishing year 22, or yes, 22, I was just trying to get that number in front of me. Bear with me a moment. '22 at 79 million. We're planning on 80. We're expecting this year, and I just wanted to get that number in front of me. We're expecting to finish this year with 82 million. So we're actually budgeting or requesting a budget below what we're projecting for this year by 2.4 million. So we aren't going higher than what we think because we do recognize there'll be some reduction in cost or some leveling off of cost. I hope that's helpful.
I think the rise in sales tax is caused more by the cost of goods going up than the sales of goods. And that's kind of all played out.
Understood. And I think, early on, we started to appreciate once the law went into place, we started to appreciate a little bit more of our internet sales tax. But again, I think that's also leveled off. I think it's a great rush of some numbers coming up because we were starting to see ours. We don't have a major retail like they do in Jefferson County and Onondaga, but I think that's leveling off as well. So certainly, but getting back this year, also our hospital distress fund money and our AIM money also helps us see that number come back to what was always ours, it was just diverted. Mr. Burke?
You said that 5 million or more in a sense evaluation is what we've had. Guess I'm wondering. I don't think there's any question that homeowners and small businesses have certainly paid their fair share as it relates to the increases totaling up to this time. My question is that I think approximately 1/8 of our tax base is large corporation. And it would be interesting knowing that what the ratio of increase has been small businesses and landowner and residences versus large corporations. Is it just the small businesses and residential people that paid for the 5 million, or has there been a proportionate increase across? Again, that doesn't have a lot to do with the budget. I'll echo what Joe and Dave said. I think we did a great job here. So, but I guess I wonder if everybody's paying their fair share. That burden isn't passed on as to small business and residential.
Certainly. So one of the points of clarification, the 5 million, I'm not sure what you're referencing there, in the levy, that the number you're talking about?
I thought you said that, there was a five, I thought you said that there was a $5 million increase resulting from the.
Valuation?
Yes,
So no, that's, we received 11% increase, which is over 700 million.
there was seven.
Yes, so I think a point you've raised over the years is the reductions in assessed valuations by these corporations. So that is happening, those are happening, and certainly I can talk with Bruce Green about what information he has access to, but I have to look at that. But the number increase is a combination of those valuations, it also sees reductions. You know, we'll run, at the beginning of the budget process, we'll get a number, it'll be different the day I present, it'll be different again when the warrants are run. And so there are impacts associated when challenges are decided by corporations or by anyone that result in a change in that number. And it often isn't to our benefit, seeing that number go down. But certainly worthwhile to know whether or not it's disproportionately residential versus commercial, I think is what I understand to be your question.
Well, it would be nice to know that you guys are paying their fair share.
Agreed.
And that when they have their fleet of attorneys reduce their investment by several million, that cost is passed on to the residential small businesses. So I'm not sure that there's an easy answer,
Agreed.
but I do think that if we could have a breakdown of the increases that most people have paid business versus the increases that may have been tagged on corporation, it might be nice to know that, because I think that there's probably some need for action.
Certainly, let me see what data we have available.
I was waiting, I'm sorry. Ruth, I'd like to echo Dave's comments regarding this budget. I think that once again, you have done yourself. And looking at the budget itself going forward, it looks relatively good. But I'm looking at three different things that I have concerns with about, not about this budget, but about future budgets. And the first one is the personnel. Personnel has gone up exponentially, at least in my mathematical mind, over the past 3 or 4 years, to where we are back almost at a level where we had a negative fund balance. Okay, and there's wiggle room there, obviously. My concern is that we're going to reach a point where our personnel costs, already a great share of the budget, are going to continue increasing to the point where we come to a point when we can only go so far. And that brings me to my second point, and that is the state's rating, if you will, every penny they possibly can from the counties to cover state programs. And it's more than outrageous. It's unconscionable what they're doing, particularly when you have a governor whose background starts in county government, and knowing the difficulties that we go through year to year based on what the state says we've got to pay for. And every year it's something different, and you can bet your bottom dollar that going forward, we're going to see more of that. The state is already, not so much recently, but bemoaning the fact that they need money, that they don't have enough money to function. Already they're spending 150% more than the entire state of California spends. And it has over twice the population of New York State. What is going on? So if we end up having to get cut by the state so they can again raid some of the monies that are coming into the counties, that is an unknown. That is something that we need to be watchful for. It needs to be something that we're gonna have to plan for, because I think you will agree that just about every year there's something. And you know, the amounts certainly vary, and I don't see them going down. And I don't have a crystal ball. The last thing I'm concerned about, and I think it's very evident tonight in the amounts of money that we get in the form of grants. For a state and a federal government that is supposedly both in financial difficulty, where the heck does this money come from? Where, you know, how do we pay for that? We pay for that with our tax dollars, of course. We're gonna have 80-some thousand more IRS people out there tracking down the people that are not paying their fair share, whatever that means. So I'm concerned that with the grant funding, all of a sudden the rug will get pulled out from underneath that. You get well over $1 million here tonight in just grant funding that is brought forward by our planning board. My concern is that, okay, we've got $1 million or a little over $1 million coming into our budget for, you know, some of this year, part of next year. How much of that will be taken back? How much of that will run out? How much of that will we look at? And here we go, coming around to personnel. How many are we going to be expected to hold on to and continue to employ if those kinds of things happen? How much can we absorb? How much additional can we absorb in manpower with its associated retirement costs, health insurance costs, and you know, benefits that we, the county, pay the lion's share of. So I love the budget as I see it. I think, as I said, that you did a great job, and I commend you highly for it, and I hope everybody else feels the same way. We still got to look out for what's around the corner, what's down the road, what we don't know is going to happen. And right now, as has been said, we don't know what we don't know. It's the mines in Albany that are the drivers of what we do here in St. Lawrence County with respect to spending money. And there are a lot of things that need to be done. As you said, county jail, emergency services, highway, public defender, district attorney, everybody needs the dollars in order to keep going. My concern is where's this cliff going to end and how close are we going to be to jumping over it? Other than that, great job, Bruce.
Have a resolution modifying the 2023 budget for sign council program 5, foresight, that.
So, speaking of Achilles heels, here's another mandate increase to the rates that we're seeing. We didn't know when we put the budget together for 2023. But I can share with you that the area where we need the funding and land for this is, we need to add 2. Sorry, family court cases needs to be 1.5. Yes, 1.5. That'd be a friendly amendment. Okay, apologies. So the reason I illustrate that point is we are not over in our budget on appeals, although I trended out for the rest of the year. We are not over on criminal cases, though again, trended out for the rest of the year. But we are significantly over in our family court cases. And so what happens is these three budget lines draw from one another. So when the family court cases are coming in extraordinarily higher, they draw away from our ability to pay in the other two categories. So this budget resolution requests for us to be able to make those payments. We also will be asking for reimbursement for half of the increase after the bills are paid. Questions?
Seeing none, all in favor?
All right.
Any opposed? Carried.
And then just a couple of other items for you. I do have an update to a resolution, and I can share this in the board share with you, to resolution 278, 2023. And this was the modifying the 2023 budget for the Public Health Department for the New York State Public Health Corps Fellowship Program. So this resolution was put before you with a budget modification, not unlike the one you just amended, that didn't add up to the total authorized. So it was asked for 53,000, but the total only came to, and the amount we're in need of is 37. So we are under the appropriations that you've authorized to be modified, but I just want to bring your attention, it'll only be 37. It won't be 50, or it won't be 53,270. It'll be 37,270. So just as a note, to clean up the record so that you have accurate information on that. Did want to mention that today is World Kindness Day. So if you haven't already, be kind to someone along your way. The Public Safety Complex mandatory walkthrough took place on November 2nd. Glenn Webster, our legislator, was able to join us for that. But it generated questions enough that an addendum needs to be issued. And so our architects have been working, they issued this addendum last Friday. However, I want to say it's over 200 pages. I can't remember the exact total, 279 maybe, in addendum items, which weren't only, it was about 22 pages of questions and answers provided, and then reports were provided. But in order to give all the contractors who were present an opportunity to review that in detail, we wanted to extend that bid return date to the 28th. Because we have the weekend there, we were supposed to see them back on the 16th, but that also comes right into the Thanksgiving week. So giving them to the 28th, I certainly think with the delays we've had, seeing and giving appropriate time for this bid to come in and meet all the specs is the best we could do for those involved. So just to keep you updated on that. The committee that's reviewing the arming of probation officers met and facilitated a discussion. Our planning staff assisted with the discussion about what we know so far, what we'd like to know if there's still information needed, and where we're at with the information that we have. And certainly I yield to anyone who wants to comment, but it was a terrific discussion about all of, all angles associated with both the challenge of this and the potential need for this. And so the outcome of that meeting was that we're going to work now on planning a program for the staff to educate them on all these situations that the group has found themselves dealing with, and then to reconvene once the staff have been educated. I think in good faith, we put out a survey to get information. The lion's share of the staff responded that they're undecided about having being armed or not being armed as a county. And so we believe that giving them an opportunity to be educated on this, understand all of the challenges that presented themselves to the committee, but also understand the benefits of it as well, is important to do at this stage. Certainly, Chair Webster, if you wanted to comment.
No, it was a good meeting. When they did the initial survey, they had no idea what, even the parameters, what it contained or anything. We didn't even have that. Although as a board or chair, we were going through everything, but they still have no idea what's going on. So by informing them and letting them understand the whole thing, I think they'll understand and have a better, be able to make a better decision.
Absolutely, and certainly commend our planner Matilda Larson. She facilitated.
She did a great job.
She did a great job for us. So it was a good conversation about the importance of this. And then finally, following up on our very successful ag tour recently and our annual road trip to the county fair, our third thing was planning of bringing back the highway tour. And as you've all been invited to, we're having that this Thursday So if you can, plan your schedules to join us. Our interest is in leaving the courthouse at 12:30 with a planned return for 4 o'clock. With stops along the way, we're finished with paving for the year, even the additional 10 miles, to view both paving projects and bridges around the county. But to finish that tour with a visit to the Potsdam Outpost and to have a tour there before returning to the courthouse. So certainly an opportunity to showcase, as we saw in the budget, quite a bit of money spent, but also some great work done by our highway staff. Any questions?
Seeing none? Okay. Next up, committee reports. Agricultural and Farmland Protection Board, Mr. Denisha.
We have not met. Since,
Thank you, sir. The Alternatives to Incarceration Board, Mr. Burke.
We have not met, so.
Thank you very much. The Board of Trustees for Supreme Court Library, does anybody have Legislator Haggard report or a report? No? Okay. The Emergency Medical Services Advisory Board last met in October, and I reported on that. Our next, or excuse me, there was no meeting in October. I reported on September's, and our next meeting is I believe Tuesday, the 28th at 6 p.m. The Environmental Management Council, Mr. Minelli.
Thank you. Our last meeting was on October 18th. Our speaker was Kathy Schrady. She runs or heads the Canton Sustainability Committee. And she gave us kind of an overview of her Eco Adapt workshop, which is adapting to climate change. In that report, it's anticipated that the average annual temperature will increase by 5.4 degrees by the 2050s. And 10.6 degrees by the 2090s. So they're looking at housing, utilities, agricultural, vulnerability outcomes based on those climate changes. And there are projection tools that are out there right now that architects are using, engineering firms are using as they plan projects, that will last decades. So one of those is the climate change adaptation certification tool. So it can be used just to make savvy decisions when designing projects that might address things like precipitation amounts or temperature changes. We also had as a guest Kate Darfler from Tompkins County. She's the EMC chair there. And it was just kind of a collaborative conversation about best practices among EMCs across the state. So it was just nice just to see how they do business, the makeup of their committee, some of their biggest projects that they focus on, successes, challenges, just to kind of compare those notes at the committee, and bylaws, reviewing the bylaw revisions and the logo update. And that was pretty much it. Our next meeting is this Wednesday.
I have a question if no one, does anybody else have a question first? So my question is 5-point-some degrees a year?
No, by the 2050s.
Oh, by the
2050s, average
5 degrees warmer.
Yes, and by the 2090s, about 10 degrees warmer, using projections, trends from the past. So she really was just talking about as they design projects moving forward, buildings, things like that might withstand, for the next 50, 60, 70 years, using some of these projection tools as part of the design process and engineering process.
Anyone else? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Minelli. So next up is the Fire Advisory Report from Mr. Denisha.
Madam Chair, last month, I was giving my report, I indicated that we have a Fire Advisory Board meeting was scheduled for the Thursday of that week. The meeting was canceled. So we are not having a Fire Advisory Board meeting until December.
Okay, thank you very much. How about the jury board, Mr. Sheriff?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The jury board met on November 2nd. And the people who were present at that meeting was the Honorable Mary Farley and Honorable Greg Story, myself, and the Commissioner, Mr. Lindsay Cota. And we were presented with copies of the 2023 calendar year statistics by the commissioner. And the discussion of the criminal, civil, grand jury, and town court statistics was had. More discussion was coming from the commissioner on continuing the practice of staying in close contact with the judges' chambers to avoid unnecessarily summoning jurors in an effort to preserve the county's limited jury pool. We're also advised that the grand jury is running smoothly. And we were also told that the number of grand juries held stayed about the same as last year's, which was usually about 5. And the jury trials have been comparable to last year's as well. The trial jurors were summoned 28 times. The criminal, there were 24 criminal trials. And there were 3, no, actually there was, yeah, and 1 civil trial and 3 trials in the city of Augsburg City Court trials. And 9 of those trials went to verdict and 0 mistrials. And there were 19 that either pled the case down and made it or had it adjourned, or it was settled some way. And the number of terms where jurors did not have to appear was 9 different times. And civil trials, but were scheduled, but were the civil trials that were scheduled but were settled before summons were mailed was amounted to about 9. And so the number of total jurors summoned up to not counting these last couple of months, 7,780. And the per diem cost totaled to about $43,480. And there's pages and pages and pages of more statistics, but that's what it was all about. And if you want those, give me a shout after the meeting and I'll supply you with the entire report. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Sheridan. Does anybody have questions for Mr. Sheridan? Seeing none. Okay. Last but not least, Mr. Craig, the planning board.
Okay, on Thursday, November 9th, we had our meeting. Planning board was first time we were short one for informal action because of the agenda number. But we did have a training session of public utility variances, and we did look at a site plan for a brew pub restaurant variance on 41, really not a variance, but some things are considered on it, at 41 West Main Street in Canton, in the village. And basically discussed it and gave them some suggestions to make to see if they needed the variances on it or not. There's no formal action that could be taken. And it was an interesting meeting.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Fick? Seeing none. On to old and new business. Does anyone have any old business they would like to discuss? About any new business? That's Mr. Denisha.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to make everyone aware that the Buildings and Grounds Committee, we met last Wednesday, week ago, and the amount of things that the schedule that's in front of us for projects that need to be addressed. The Buildings and Grounds Committee is we agreed to meet the 2nd and 4th Wednesday of each month. Not sure how long this is going to last, but we've got a full agenda and those that really make any headway with at least first.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for the report?
I just want to follow up on that a little bit with, and I brought it up to Ruth's attention, a few weeks ago, is parking. With all these projects going on around here, and I know that if you try to come here at 2 o'clock in the afternoon,
Good luck.
good luck, you know. Parking, and she made it sound it's good, but geez, I don't know where everyone's gonna fit. But
Yeah, and that's, if I may, actually, that's one of the topics that we discussed. And it's gonna get, parking's bad enough as it is, but with the construction. Yeah, so that's on our list.
Anyone else? Okay, seeing none, then I guess we would go on to executive session. Do we have a need for executive session? We do, for litigation and appointments. Okay, have a motion to go into executive session. Mr. Forsythe.
That's the one we're here until 10 minutes. Yeah, you can get.
Favor?
Sorry.
Yeah.